Welcome back to another episode of Church is Stupid.
Comma but.
And this week we have with us myself, Ruth.
Hi, I'm Andy.
And it's me, Elijah. I'm back.
We are very glad to have you back, though.
It's good to be back after my not break. That was here last time.
I think you've only missed one set of recordings, though, right?
I think I have. Yeah.
He has, and I still haven't called him a main person yet because I'm the worst.
Well,
I'm still not getting paid, so it's...
Well, we already know who the main characters of
I'm
the story
not getting
are,
paid
so.
by my wife, the host of this podcast.
Anyhow.
Welcome, everyone.
On that note, welcome back. And it's just the three of us today. And we would like to talk about a topic that hopefully will resonate with a lot of you guys, which is being young in the church.
And this is something that is very near and dear to my heart, considering I am a whopping age of 22.
Old.
Yeah. Growing up, I have had a lot of issues with a lot of things that a lot of churches do. And I'm not saying every church does all of the things that we may talk about today, but there aren't many who do young student ministries or even college-age ministries to an extent that I've found favorable, I will say.
That was very diplomatic.
I'm trying not to fully call it out and be like, y'all people suck at student ministries, but there have been a lot of those instances where I've just found it, and it's been like...
Well, and they don't call us the lost generation for nothing. That is actually what our generation is referred to in a lot of theological, churchy environment book things.
I'm not a part of your generation.
Oh, no! Oh, no! You're not wrong! That hurt! Okay. Just for reference, the terror that just ensued. Andy is 22, and I, alas, am 27.
And I have...
You guys have nothing in common at all.
No, nothing in common at all. But
there's nothing that you guys understand between each other.
It's kind of weird, this conversation about generations and which generation people are a part of, because there's no standard for it. There's nothing that says this is when one generation...
There is, actually.
We
looked into it.
There's a very loose standard. It is a sort of standard, but it's definitely not this is the year that makes you a generation, that makes you part of this or that. There's a general outline of kind of what separates generations that I think gets a little more cloudy with Gen Z and millennial.
Well, and this is something we looked into because, Elijah, how old are you?
I am 24.
And so obviously I am 3 years older than Elijah. So even though we're married...
I need a soundboard button here for a yikes noise or something like that.
Thanks for that. That makes me feel so much better. I appreciate it. Yikes. Thanks, Sandy.
I need a soundboard, and the sound I would use is yikes.
The only sound I need.
I feel like that would suit this podcast. Yikes.
Well, or just have a comma but, programmed into the soundboard.
Perfect.
So it's consistent. Okay, never mind. Continuing,
Back on.
What's the science that you found?
So, actually, the standards that we found are, one, if you can remember having no internet in your phone, that too, I guess, but in your home, or if you remember dial-up. So, the very famous... that thing.
See, now I remember that, but I was 4 at the time, so I barely remember that.
Well, and there's more, okay? So there's that, but then there's also September 11th is a really big cutoff. Because for someone like me, I remember September 11th. I remember what I was doing. I know where I was. I mean, it's foggy because I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, but I remember it. And for Elijah told me he doesn't have any memory of it.
I don't. I have memories of being in school after and everyone talking about it and me as in elementary school not understanding the scope of everything at all. But I really don't have any memories at all of that day at all.
Yeah, and I would imagine you don't either.
The extent of what I remember about that day is literally the walk that I had home from my preschool because it was right next to my house. And so I wouldn't, sometimes we'd get picked up or like my mother would walk over there and pick me up. And that's the extent of what happened. That's the only thing I remember.
Yeah.
I'm shocked you even remember that much because you were born
I was
in
3.
Yeah, how do you remember that? That's crazy.
Literally the only thing I remember about
That's
that.
fair. And so that's actually one of the cutoffs though for because me and Elijah looked this up because we are 3 years apart, and that doesn't sound like a lot, except apparently to Andy, who was going to put a yikes noise. But regardless, it doesn't sound like a lot, but there's a lot of ways that we communicate and grew up that are very different. And that a lot of it has to do with things like technology in school. You know, we had to handwrite a lot of our papers until I was in high school. And my family, we had one computer that sat in our living room, and that was all we could use.
Yeah.
I didn't get a laptop till I went to college. I didn't get a smartphone until I was a sophomore in college. Like, or was I a freshman? It might have been at the Christmas I was a freshman. But those things aren't as familiar with me. So while Facebook and MySpace are things that I was familiar with, things like Twitter and TikTok and stuff like that are pretty out of my wheelhouse. These things changed so quickly.
Yeah.
And so when we're talking about being young in the church, for me, in a lot of ways, I feel like I can't even claim I'm still young in the church. And that's not because, like, I mean, statistically, yes, I am. But realistically, the difference between me and a 24-year-old is already pretty big. Between me and Andy, I'm sure there's even more differences.
Yep.
And then between me and somebody in high school is completely different. So being young is just sort of this arbitrary term that we throw out. And my experience with young adult groups is that a lot of them don't know when they age out. And that's really difficult to watch because nobody wants to put a defining age on it, because then you're calling people old or middle-aged or whatever. And I think people are really hesitant to do that. And I watched it happen at my church camp. And it was really sad. There was a ton of people, and probably someone's going to be listening from it. I'm sorry if this is offensive. But the young adult group had people with like middle school aged kids, or with, you know, and as an 18-year-old walking into that, you're just in totally different environments.
Oh, yeah.
And it just became evident as that went on that eventually that group that was the young adults just a couple years ago became the former young adults, which I was glad to see that transition happen, because I think it was necessary, and it was just making, not that they were bad, they're wonderful people and I very much enjoy them, but it wasn't really a young adult group anymore. You know, and so I sort of feel like for me now as a parent, while I'm a young family, or we're a young family, I don't really consider us a young adult. I would still consider Elijah a young adult. But I feel like that's kind of the defining factor for me.
What is
having a kid?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Andy, you were just going to say okay and let me be confusing?
No. So I kind of understood like where you're coming from. The other thing is Elijah also has a kid, and you said that he was probably still a part of young. So
I know, and so
your
that's
defining factors.
It's a lie.
Yeah, but I think that those defining factors are oftentimes very much so problematic. Like with a lot of things that we do, especially student ministries, which I have been a part of. Young student ministries have been a part of the Grand Traverse District Council of Youth Ministries, which is a very fancy name for saying we put on some events for youth in like the Grand Traverse area.
Yeah.
Which, hey, they're fun as all get out. We didn't know what we were doing to save our life. Which I apologize if anybody's listening to this and thinks that we did have any idea what we were doing.
You've just crushed so many people. But it's okay. I crushed my whole church camp, so I guess.
Well, yeah, and so like, I really do associate with that whole idea of church camp and the whole phasing out thing, because about my freshman year of college, I had missed the last 2 years of being able to go to church camp with all of my friends and everything that were there.
Yep.
And so I came back that next year, and I was working at the camp. and like all of my friends were still there, and so we would enjoy our time together. But ultimately, I wasn't a part of the group anymore. I wasn't a part of the youth group session. So instead of being able to attend Bible study and like grow in faith with them, it was my job to set up the hoses for an event that was later or different things like that. It wasn't, which hurt a lot because, there were extenuating circumstances that meant that I couldn't spend my senior year with those people, which is something that like I miss a lot. And so very sad. And now that I'm very sad again.
Thanks, Andy. No.
Yes, I was talking about student ministries in like church settings. And I think a lot of the time, a problem that we see not only with student ministries, but also with like adult ministries and all ministries in altogether in total. I don't know what word I'm going for there, but is this formation of cliques that happen.
Yes.
And especially with, so not to call out a church, if anybody's listening from there, when I was in Traverse City, I attended a church. And the first couple of years, we tried to attend the student ministries and like tried to join a part of that group. And I had a friend there who was awesome, and she like helped include me in a lot of things. But ultimately, I was joining my freshman year of high school, and I wasn't a part of this group since they were all kids. And so everybody else got along very, very well and like participated in everything and all of this, but there was no invitation for an outsider. And oftentimes that just doesn't show up for people who like live and grow up in a church. They form different attachments than somebody who's new coming to the church will ever be able to form. And so there's just this problem that I see of people not being able to be included as much with student ministries. And even like looking at high school, this is also a problem that like just happens in high school, is like sometimes a new kid just gets accepted, sometimes they don't. And I guess that's just my experience with all of the student ministries, is that there are a lot of issues that I don't think many people either see or understand or want to see. And so a lot of these issues just don't get fixed.
Well, that's interesting, actually, because I remember I moved the year after I graduated high school, or the summer after I graduated high school. So basically, I graduated high school, and then I moved away from all my friends before I went to college, which is kind of really a sad time to move.
Very sad, yes.
But thankfully, it was only like 45 minutes away from where I was, so it wasn't impossible for me to see people. But my dad had asked me if I would be willing to be a part of the youth ministry program that the church had. And I didn't want to, because I was 17, almost 18, going to college. I'm like, I'm really not youth anymore. But I did. And when I was being introduced, some of the members of the youth group, I just remember they were so proudly telling me this story about how if they don't like you, they make it known. And they took this new girl, her hat and her purse, and they put it in the sink in the kitchen and just soaked it. And they were really proud of this story of how they chased off this person they didn't like. And the youth directors were like aware and laughing along. And I went home that day and told my dad I'm never going back, because why would I want to go back to that? And so that was kind of sorry, you just reminded me of that.
No, you're good.
That experience. But I feel like there's almost this extreme that happens on one side or another, where it's like we don't listen to youth and what they want, or we're so afraid of losing them that we give them everything, but we don't give any meat, if that makes any sense. There's no real instruction. Like, how do you laugh along? Well, a youth kid tells you they chased someone away from your youth group. It was very interesting.
It's a very extreme example too.
It
like
was.
It definitely sounds like what 90s movies depict like middle school as, to me.
Well,
Like,
Have you ever been in middle school, please?
I mean, definitely those older movies, I feel like took the examples that may have happened and made it like, this is a reality all the time for kids.
Yep.
Well, I know it was such a weird subset of like people. I just wouldn't have expected it. if that makes any sense. And it just completely turned me off. But that was really my only experience with youth group, because my dad was a pastor and a lot of churches don't have youth groups. So,
Yep.
or they did, and my mom was the youth leader and my siblings were the fellow youth kids. And it really just doesn't work as well when your parents are the youth leaders. And my parents are very wonderful. And I love you, Mom, and I love you, Dad. But I didn't want you as my youth leader.
And I completely agree with that, being the pastor's kid as well as the youth pastor's kid. It's very difficult being able to sometimes open up and share the same experiences that other kids have in youth group or anything like that, especially if your parent is the one leading everything, because it's like, sometimes I don't want my parents to know everything or anything like that, and so it's very difficult to like either open up to a group of your peers, which is a little bit easier. Sometimes you get judged, but not as harshly. But opening up to your parents about some things, you fear a lot more repercussions out of things.
Yeah.
Well, and I think a lot of churches are small enough that youth groups end up being that a lot of times, where it's led by a family in the church or like a parent in the church. And that's not always a bad thing, but it can definitely become a conflict of interest. At least I think it can be. Like you said, it's harder to open up. There's certain things that, you know, and my parents, again, were very wonderful and very easy to talk to. But if I was mad at them and I went to youth group and they wanted to talk to me about things, probably not going to happen. You know, stuff like that makes it a little bit more difficult when you have parents that are in charge.
These are definitely things that you two can relate to, that I am not in this same boat, for sure. It's interesting listening to you two talk about those dynamics, especially as like a normal thing that both of you can relate to, because I am totally off base when it comes to that, because I did not grow up a pastor's kid.
And I think most people didn't.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, based on fractions and math and all that. I think most people
Based on fractions.
Based on the amount of pastors versus the amount of churchgoers, I think
and
you
the
could.
amount of kids.
Yeah.
I feel like the population trend is in decline. Like we aren't having enough kids
Well,
to
of course
sustain
it
the.
is.
Sorry, I hate that got like that. That's where my brain went to. But like,
Isn't it crazy that about the population decline right now?
isn't it crazy that our population density?
Not
is
really. Not
Wait,
really.
Population density is different.
I don't know. Okay,
All right.
We're gone.
All right.
We're gone.
I'm not an anthropologist.
We are officially off base again. I don't know if we're talking about our personal experiences. I grew up in pretty much one church for most of my life, definitely all of my adult life, or I'm sorry, young adult life. And our church was very, very non-denominational, very charismatic, and I would say probably like almost half of, if you can call them like attendees, I don't know, half of the people in the church were definitely like young adults or youth, and they were, for the most part, all kind of grouped. If I'm remembering correctly, like mostly grouped into one. I think we had some, if you can call them, programs for like middle school and like young high school versus like separated from like younger adults, like little things, but for the most part, the like worship events that we had that were focused on youth was just that entire crowd into one, sort of. And the church itself too, outside of like the youth program as well, like the church itself was very youth focused, I would say, not 100%, but it was, yeah, they were very, very engaged with like most of the church, like normal church activities, I would say, as well. And I definitely remember some form, like you know, I think no matter where you go, even the small youth groups, although they might be less easy to see, no matter where you go when it comes to youth, I mean, really anyone, you're going to see some form of cliques or you know, groups of people who are more comfortable around each other than just other people. And unfortunately, that results in some people feeling left out and other people not really necessarily realizing that it is that way.
Andy, I think he just told you to suck it up.
Well, no,
No, I'm just kidding.
No,
I completely agree, like with your
Yeah.
experience. But in a scenario like that, you have the large environment where there is enough of those cliques, enough of those groups that if you get kicked out of one, there's probably somebody else who has more interest.
Yeah,
or
yeah.
anything
And
like that.
I can't ever say that, at least that I personally had an experience with or saw people getting like literally kicked out of
Yes.
something or directly and intentionally excluded. But it was, there were instances where I think people didn't really want to see or admit that there were some groups of people who, while they maybe could have engaged more with the rest of the groups, still didn't feel as included. I'm trying to say like groups of people who were less included, who both sides could have done more to basically either engage or reach out to each other, kind of a thing. The thing that stands out more, though, wasn't really my church in that aspect. There was a period of time where I actually was invited to attend like another youth program from another church that was giant. They had like a youth group, like worship session once a week, and they had like an entire facility behind their big church, like for their young adult activities. They had like it was a really big church, and the facility specifically behind the church had like a basketball court kind of a thing, and it was a giant space inside for a really big worship team and a lot of kids from all over the area to come and worship together as well. And that was an area where there must have been 150 to 200 kids there, like once a week, every week.
And it wasn't a big building.
It was, no, I'm not talking about my church. I'm talking about something else. A different youth group that I attended at one point.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember
I
the.
apologize.
I don't remember
know
the name
anything.
Yeah, you're playing too much Pokemon over there.
You're not supposed to tell people.
No, this was a different thing that another one of my friends invited me to outside of the youth group that I was a part of. So, this building. I'm sorry. Let me get back on track. What I'm trying to say is that because that was an experience where I actually was an outsider, whereas my main church, I grew up with all of those people and the youth leaders from when I was a very young child, so I knew everyone. So being an outsider at another youth group that was much bigger, it was clear as day to see, like, you could very clearly identify the groups of people who stuck together. And it was much more apparent to me while visiting that one that it was really easy to feel excluded. And it is definitely something that I think a lot of, especially larger youth programs in churches, don't necessarily know how to even address, I think.
Well, I
Because
wonder if-
you don't want to tell anyone, you don't want to try to pressure people, especially young people, to reach out in ways that they're not comfortable with without like, like guiding them gently into like being more comfortable. But you also don't want to encourage, I feel, I don't think that it's right or healthy to encourage just only staying in your group. And why, because you have to admit that some people, even if it's not maliciously or intentional, you have to be able to admit that some kids are going to just be left out, especially if they're new. And I think that a lot of churches, and from my experience, I think a lot of the leadership team and like the main leaders of like the youth programs, I think, can have a tough time addressing the problem head on, instead of just kind of saying to everyone, make sure that you're including everyone. I mean, we don't want anyone to feel left out. I think there has to be a little bit more of a very intentional and direct effort to actually seek out the people who really are excluded and to intentionally go to them.
Well, and I think, I wonder how your experience was shaped from the fact that in the first scenario, you grew up in that church.
Yeah.
And so to you, it didn't seem like there was much exclusion happening. Whereas
Not as much, yeah.
In the second scenario, you were the outsider for the first time. So I wonder if that did form,
No, you're good.
No, it's a good
weird
follow-up.
observy
Yeah.
Ruth, because
yeah.
we grew up always the outsiders
Mm-hmm.
Because we just moved around a lot.
Yeah.
I'm speaking for you, Andy.
No,
You're
yeah,
welcome.
you're
Well,
good.
and this is different too, because you guys grew up in the United Methodist denomination for the most
Yeah.
part.
Yeah.
And if some of you are listening and you don't know, like the pastors for those churches get moved around all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in my church, even though my parents weren't the pastors, we were friends with them and very close with them from the beginning of us attending there, and therefore, like, we knew everyone, and I knew everyone like pretty early on. So while you may think that like a pastor's kid would be the people who always feel included, sometimes like in the UMC where the pastors are moving around, it's actually the opposite. Because I think that's an interesting thing to talk about too.
Well, and there's always the dynamic. It's sort of like being the principal's kid.
Right.
The dynamic of like, yeah, that's a whole other issue. But the other thing, and so I think those are some really good points. But I think the thing that I struggle with is not even as much that, but for people who are in college, for people who then leave college, or people who don't go to college, because there's not anywhere for them to plug in. Like when we have a youth group, a lot of youth group leaders will intentionally try to plug in new students, as you had indicated, to other groups, even if they're not perfect at it, and they're trying to find those exclusions and plug them in. But the problem is that the church sort of forgets about college students, and then again, students who don't go to college. There's not a lot of ministries directed, because as a 27-year-old in the church, I don't really want to join a knitting circle.
Speak for yourself.
I am. Yeah. I'm speaking for myself. I do actually know a lot of 27-year-olds who do love knitting, but like, I don't want to, I'm probably not going to go to a quilting bee or things like that. But I'm not going to go to the youth group either, because I'm not youth. So then where do you fit in? And that can get even more complicated based, again, on families versus not having a family yet, single versus married, all of these other things. And I don't know that we would ever be able to address every single group.
Right.
But we are missing a huge portion of the population. And I think that's something that we can lead into for our topic on Thursday, is about ways that the groups in church can be formed for younger.
And we're definitely right now.
Looking at me like I'm crazy, and I
You
can't.
took my entire job away from me. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Please forget everything I just said. Now let's turn it over to Andy.
No, Elijah, yeah, go for
Well,
it.
thanks, Sandy. I appreciate that a lot. I just want to give a quick follow-up that we're definitely right now just addressing things that we'll call them issues or just topics that we've seen that could be worked on in the church without really like casting blame on anyone. And whether I need to, I don't really know if I really need to or not, but I just want to like follow up with, I'm not blaming or even like coming down on any people that I may have just mentioned, like in my experience with like these two different youth ministries or anything. I'm not really, we're not bringing up all these things to expose leaders who aren't doing enough. Because if anything, I can't even really imagine how difficult it is, especially in a giant youth group, to try to do your best to make everyone feel welcomed.
Yeah.
Especially when you don't have any control over social norms or the way that people group up. I think so. I just want to say that I'm definitely not trying to expose problems in leadership for youth as much as really what I'm just trying to do is just talk about my personal experiences, and it would be very, very awesome if even just talking about those experiences, if those resonated with any of you listening right now. That's really all I'm trying to do, because I know that's a lot of youth leaders work their butts off trying to really ensure the best for all of their, all of the people in their group.
As do a lot of church leaders outside of the youth as well.
Of course, yeah.
And again, I just, in our last minute or so.
Yeah, I didn't start my time on time either. So
You didn't, but I did. So I
Did you?
actually have the timer, and it is.
okay. So no, you didn't, because mine is only 10 seconds behind yours.
So in our last minute
Okay,
or so, we're
anyhow.
just going to talk about how much time we have left.
In our last minute or so, I just would like to bring it back to just the heart of what we're doing. As Elijah indicated, we're not trying to blame. We're not trying to yell at. We're not trying to cause a ton of, I don't know, release anger upon everyone. We're trying to raise up issues that we see within our own ministry and really create a home for people, to create
Yeah.
a place for people to feel welcome, and to feel like they can talk about their experiences with being young in church and not feel like they have to either hide that or pretend.
Be ashamed of it.
Be ashamed of it,
Yeah.
or even feel guilty. Like, I could hear almost in your voice that little bit of guilt as you talk about your experience not feeling welcome in a youth group.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's something that we need to feel guilty about. It's something we need to talk about so we can work on creating a better church together. And I think that's
Yeah, amen.
important to
So we
highlight.
are pretty much out of time.
Yes.
So, extending an invitation to all of you listening. We want to hear your experiences. We want to hear your issues that you found. So leave that comment down in the description, either on YouTube, on Facebook, tweet at us, Instagram comment.
We have Instagram.
Trying to think about all the different things that we have.
Instagram comment,
And we are now on Apple Podcasts. We are on Spotify. We are on Google Podcasts and a bunch of other things that I don't know because I can't remember them
Heck
all.
yeah. If you're listening on YouTube and you don't want to keep your app open the entire time, check us out on Apple Podcasts or Spotify for sure. You will love it.
We probably should have put this at the beginning.
Yeah,
of
we'll
the
put it at the
Yeah, we'll
beginning
do it
of
at the
Okay.
beginning of the next one.
All right,
Also,
great.
shout out to our new social media director, Kate. You're wonderful. All
Just
right.
Kate. Thank you, Kate.
Yep. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today. I am Andy.
I'm Ruth.
And I'm Elijah.
Enjoy the rest of your day, I guess. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Bye.
Bye.